The Assad regime's brutal 5-decade-long hold on power in Syria is over. In Damascus, celebrations on the streets after rebel forces took the capital almost unopposed and President Assad was forced to flee. The leader of the insurgency told crowds the victory is for all Syrians. The presidential palace has been overrun and looted, but the Syrian Prime Minister says he will stay and work with the rebel forces as leaders around the world call for a peaceful transition. Tonight, the whereabouts of Bashar al-Assad are unknown. We'll be live in the Middle East and Washington, assessing his 24-year reign and what today's momentous developments mean for the region and beyond.
This is ITV News with Romilly Weeks.
Good evening. After more than 5 decades of brutal control over Syria and 14 years of civil war, the end for the Assad regime when it came was swift. In the early hours of this morning, rebel forces declared they'd taken Damascus and Russia confirmed President Assad had fled, although it's not known where. By this afternoon, the victorious rebel leader, Abu Mohammed al-Jawlani, was addressing crowds inside the city's historic Umayyad Mosque. He and Syria's Prime Minister have both pledged to work towards an orderly transfer of power as the world watches nervously to see what happens next. Geraint Vincent has our first report on the day's momentous events.
Damascus is free, and its streets and squares are full of joy. Guns are fired in celebration, and the symbols of a regime which ruled this land with such brutality are suddenly souvenirs. Since we were born, says this man, we have lived in fear and oppression. But now we are free, and that pain has been lifted from our hearts. Signs of the speed of the regime's collapse litter the city. Military vehicles abandoned in the road by henchmen who realised the game was up. At the end of their stunning advance from the north of the country to the capital, a group of rebels went on state television to announce the liberation of Damascus just before dawn this morning. Shortly after that, the Prime Minister was filmed being escorted from his office by armed men. He said in a speech this morning that power would be handed over in a peaceful transition. This afternoon, the rebels' leader paid a symbolic visit to the Umayyad Mosque in central Damascus. Abu Mohammed al-Jawlani told the crowd that the grief and tears of Assad's victims was the driving force behind their victory. Last week, speaking disrespectfully of the dictator Assad would have landed you in jail here. Now people step on his image as they walk into one of his palaces to take what they can find, or simply to look and take pictures of the comforts he enjoyed while so many of his people suffered. Elsewhere, the revolution brought light into some of the regime's darkest corners, like the prisons where political opponents were locked up. Here, bewildered inmates are being freed from the women's block of the notorious Sednaya prison. From one cell emerges a small child. "Don't be scared," a voice shouts. Assad has fallen. He has fled too, leaving his country to an uncertain future, which is full now of different dangers. For the moment, though, freedom is here, and for the first time in more than 50 years, Syria's people can hope for something better. Geraint Vincent, ITV News.
Today marks the end of more than 50 years of rule by the Assad family. When Bashar succeeded his father Hafez, many hoped that the apparently mild-mannered eye doctor would bring reform. But instead, the son's brutal tactics matched his father's, sparking a 14-year civil war. Here's our senior international correspondent, John Irvine.
While training to be an eye surgeon in London, Bashar al-Assad was recalled to Damascus after his brother's death made him heir apparent. His father Hafez ruled with an iron fist for 30 years, but when his son took over at the start of the new century, there were hopes that this clean-cut young leader, with his glamorous British-born wife by his side, would be a reformer.
Good afternoon. How are you?
He was welcomed by Western leaders keen to encourage the promising changes they thought he was contemplating. However, hopes for a new dawn were dashed as regime troops brutally cracked down on peaceful demonstrators energized by the Arab Spring convulsing the region in 2011. The descent into civil war would see the regime's murderous tactics create an exodus of more than 6 million people into neighbouring Turkey, Syria and Jordan, while inside Syria itself, displacement camps grew by the day in the rebel-held areas. In 2013, the regime took the monstrous step of using chemical weapons. But the rebel threat continued to grow until in 2015, Vladimir Putin threw Assad the lifeline of air support. Russian jets would turn the tide as they bombed civilians. Syrian helicopter crews dropped crude but deadly barrel bombs on defenseless communities, and the death toll skyrocketed to well over 500,000. Bashar al-Assad would win the first phase of the civil war, but 4 years of complacency left him vulnerable enough to lose the second phase inside a fortnight, and he is now an international fugitive on the run.
And John joins us from Tel Aviv now. John, this is a huge but precarious moment for Syria and the wider Middle East.
Romilly, this is Syria's equivalent of the tearing down of the Berlin Wall. At the height of the civil war, those of us who went into Idlib province witnessed just how barbaric the Assad regime really was, with monstrous airstrikes, murderous airstrikes killing women and children, stories of torture and kidnapping, the ethnic cleansing basically of a large chunk of Syria's population. Now, what's next? We don't really know. The big question, has HTS, the former Al-Qaeda affiliate, really gone through its own conversion on the long road to Damascus? I don't think we'll have to wait very long to find out. What they must not do is repeat the mistakes made in Baghdad after the overthrow of Saddam Hussein, when all Iraqis with a past were told they don't have a future. Syria needs to keep some of the administrators, civil servants, to keep the lights on, Romilly, and I think, the treatment so far of the Prime Minister is encouraging.
Right, John, thank you. The man who will be America's president in just a few weeks has made it clear he has no intention of intervening in Syria. Donald Trump said it's not our fight. So let's turn to our correspondent in Washington, Robert Moore. Robert, how much concern or optimism is there in Washington following today's developments?
Well, there's both concern and optimism. President Biden just about to speak to the American people, having been meeting today with his top national security advisors. The US completely misjudged the power and the speed of this rebellion, just like 3 years ago they misjudged the speed of the advances of the Taliban in Afghanistan. And it leaves America in an awkward position. Mohammed al-Jilani, the main rebel leader, is designated here as a terrorist leader with a $10 million bounty on his head. That will need to be reassessed. So will the position of the 900 or so US troops deployed in eastern Syria. On the other hand, the US will welcome the humiliation this represents for both Iran and for Russia. And indeed, overnight, President-elect Donald Trump linked the Ukraine war and Syria, insisting now is also the time for a ceasefire, an immediate ceasefire in the Ukraine conflict as well.
Robert in Washington, thank you. In other news, the leader of Edinburgh City Council has been suspended by the Labour Party amid accusations he sent inappropriate messages. According to the Sunday Mail, Cammy Day is alleged to have bombarded 2 Ukrainian refugees with approaches on a dating app. Police Scotland have confirmed receiving a report of inappropriate behaviour. And parts of England and Wales have been hit by floods as the tail end of Storm Dara brought more rain and high winds today. More than 160,000 people nationwide are still without power. And that is all for now, but we'll be back with all the latest tonight after I'm a Celebrity. Until then, have a very good evening. Goodbye.